In this video, we're going to recap UConn's 73-55 victory over Georgetown, but the recap will be pretty brief. I plan to look at some other questions, namely, do Azzi Fudd and Paige Bueckers play well together? I was discussed in one of the chats I was in, and I'm going to take a look at the data. The other question I wondered about was, is this UConn team better set up than last year's UConn team? And once again, took a look a little bit of the data. I found it interesting, and I will share with you what I found. Before we start, if you enjoyed the content, then please consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. Now, in terms of the game, Georgetown kept it close up until halftime. That was mainly due to them winning the three-point contest at halftime. They shot 43% on 7 of 16 versus UConn that was 3 of 9 for 33%. In the second half, UConn turned that around, and both teams finished 38% from the three-point line, with UConn going 10 for 26 and Georgetown 10 for 26 as well. Looking at the shot chart on UConn's defense this season, they are giving up 37% on corner threes. I'm sure that Gino and CD and the rest of the coaching staff isn't real pleased with that. I don't know if it's just an anomaly and players are making shots or not, but that's something to keep your eye on, as that's high for UConn. Last year, top of the arc three-pointers, they gave up around 28%, and corner threes were 29%. So once again, to be determined if this will lower throughout the year, but I'm sure it's something UConn coaches have their eye on. Ice Brady was out with sickness, so that gave Jenna Alfie not really extended minutes. She played 18 minutes, and essentially when she was off, they went small with Morgan Shelley. Looking at the various performances, Sarah Strong was Sarah Strong. Like, she was good. 7 of 15 for 16 points. She was 1 of 5 from 3, 9 rebounds, 3 steals. Just the usual typical Sarah Strong game. I mean, she didn't take over the game, but she does what Sarah Strong does. Alfie continues to be a work in progress. She got 4 points. You know, up and down with her. You can tell that Gino gets frustrated, but I did like that she didn't have to look over her shoulder as much to see if Ice was going to come in or not. Ashlyn Shade, she stepped in, did well. She was 5 of 10 for 12 points. Caitlin Chin and KK Arnold continued to split time, so Chin had 22 minutes versus KK that had 22 minutes as well. Chin shot a little bit better, going 3 of 4 for this game. I think she came in 0 for 10. Yeah, you really wish you could meld KK Arnold and Caitlin Chin together, and it would be the perfect player, because KK gives you better ball pressure. You expect Chin to give you better shooting, and so I understand why Gino splits their time. But yeah, if you could turn them into one player, you would have an exceptional point guard. The big news off the last 2 games versus Xavier and Georgetown is it seems like Azzi Fudd is knocking off the rust. Against Xavier, she went 9 of 14 for 23 points versus Georgetown went 8 of 13 for 21 points. Now, while watching the game, I was in the comments, and if you can avoid the trolls, like, some people just like to hate on these players, but if you can avoid the trolls and ignore that, there was an interesting one where somebody was like, I think Azzi plays better when Paige Bueckers isn't in the lineup. And I chimed in and said, yeah, I think you're right. It feels like she's more aggressive and able to take over. But I thought I would take a look at the numbers. The first thing that's striking, since Azzi Fudd has come to UConn in 21-22, they have only played 21 games together. So they're almost like 2 ships missing in the night. And I know it's well documented. In 21-22, when they both played together for 14 games, they combined averaged 24 points per game. When Paige Bueckers was in 2 games alone, she averaged 22 points per game. When Fudd played without Paige Bueckers her freshman year for 10 games, she averaged 15 points per game. Now, they always, regardless of together or not, they were generally efficient when playing together, or their numbers over that time were efficient. In 22-23, that's the one that Paige Bueckers missed entirely due to her knee injury, her ACL. Fudd averaged 15 points per game that season, although she obviously missed a lot of time that season due to her own knee issues. In 23-24, in games together, they averaged 28 points per game. Now, that's noting that Azzi Fudd only played 2 games in that season prior to rupturing her ACL. During the rest of the season, Paige Bueckers on her own averaged 22 points per game. Thus far in 24-25, when playing together, they have averaged 27 points per game. Paige Bueckers on her own in 2 games averaged 23 points per game, and Fudd on her own for 2 games averaged 22 points per game. So in the dream scenario, if Fudd and Paige Bueckers could play extended minutes together, you would expect them to average between 24 and 28 points per game. In comparison, I guess the other best backcourt in women's basketball would be Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles. Hidalgo averages 24 points per game and Miles 16, so their production is 36 points per game. Hence why Notre Dame is so good. Non-believers in Azzi Fudd and Paige Bueckers working well together would point probably to the early game last year versus NC State, where Azzi Fudd had a terrible game. She only went for 9 points, and that's not too bad, but on 4 of 13 shooting. If you're a believer of Paige Bueckers and Azzi Fudd, their game should fit perfectly together, then you'd point to their freshman year when they played NC State in the Elite Eight tournament game, when Bueckers went for 27 points and Azzi Fudd gave great support, going for 19 points on 7 of 16 shooting. Now into regards to if the 2024-25 UConn team is better than last year's team, I think it's fairly obvious. At the point guard spot, they were better off last season with Nika Mule versus KK Arnold and Caitlin Chen. Like I said, if you could combine Chen and KK, that would be the perfect player, but obviously you can't. And Chen isn't quite the shooter that Mule was last year. And I would say their defense, I think KK probably brings a little bit better defense than Nika, but it's very close. So that is the slight downgrade. The upgrade is obviously Aaliyah Edwards. And yes, Edwards played the 5, but really she was a 4. And I would say that their best lineup for UConn this year will be when Sarah Strong is at the 5. If you look at Edwards and Sarah Strong's stats through 16 games, their points per game are similar, with Strong at 17 and Edwards 16. But you can just see in the stats and through the eye test, Strong is just so much more dynamic and able to take players off the dribble and a threat from outside, which just totally opens up the game for UConn. So that's a massive upgrade for UConn. Now, if you're a UConn fan, you're hoping that Paige Bueckers returns, hopefully, well, as soon as possible. Obviously, St. John's would be nice. But if she was able to come back at the Seton Hall game, as well as Aubrey Griffin, then that would give them 2 to 3 weeks to get themselves ready for Tennessee, which will be on the 7th of February, and then ready themselves as well for South Carolina, which is on the 17th of February, which will be good test to see where this team is at. Now it's over for you for your comments and poison. Do you see Paige Bueckers and Azzi Fudd working well together and living up to the hype that everybody thought they would be if they could ever be healthy on the court together? As well, do you think this UConn team of 24-25 is better placed to make it to the Final Four and win a championship than last year's UConn team of 23-24? Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great night.